Welcome back to another episode of Automate Office Work. I'm your host, Justin, and today's episode is automation versus AI, how they fit together. And we have a special guest today, Sal Carranza from his company, Possiblaw. And so he's gone on kind of a similar journey as me, from lawyer to automation expert. And tell us some more, Sal.
Thanks for having me, Justin. I'm excited to chat. Yeah, look, I've been in the legal industry for 19 years. I was a lawyer. I did the big law kind of work, and it kind of burned out. But along the way, at every piece of it, I always loved technology. I still do. I'm the guy that's got like a box of random first adopter stuff in my basement, and I've loved applying that kind of earnest passion for technology in legal. And now my role is really, how can I help lawyers attack this kind of new age? And so the way I talk about it is that I help lawyers learn how to use AI like a 10x software developer without becoming a software developer. And why do I say
Mhm.
that? Well, I really think that software and law are converging in a way that hasn't happened before. And I really want lawyers who have incredible domain expertise to have a seat at that table. And so I think to do that, you have to have a better understanding, like we do, of how all the different technologies work. Not become a coder, but just understand the architectures. That includes everything from automation to really, bleeding edge, state of the art models in AI and everything in between.
Mhm. I like that. I like how you put that they don't have to learn the coding themselves, but in my mind, it's kind of a mindset. There's this programmer's mindset that one of the best ways to get it is to learn how to code, but you don't necessarily have to learn how to code in order to get it. It's like thinking in patterns and being able to see the repeatable processes, that not everything is just random one off, but you can like describe it in a set pattern, and then you can take that and you can apply whatever technology works to it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of the benefits of sort of the software developer mindset is a willingness to fail. When I first got into it, realizing that, your code would not compile and would just not work because you missed a comma or a space, or right. It was like all these like very basic ideas, but the only way you got better at it was you just kept trying. And I think, I talk about this in the legal industry, is that we're so focused on black and white. It's either right or wrong. We have to get it right. Risk has all this, end game problems to it that we end up not being willing to try because we're so afraid to fail.
Mm.
And so I think that idea of a mindset is really important. And so the big thing I always say is, look, you learn by doing. That's just how it is. You can read all you want, but go try stuff. And then on the second part of it, which you also touched on, is you can learn the architecture, the patterns of software, so that when you are talking to software, when you're using your legal skills to be really clear and concise and provide a thought, you can tell it what you want. And then you're going to get amazing output that you're otherwise not getting. Right. And I think the bigger picture for me is that in all these pieces, whether you're doing it yourself or you're bringing in somebody like you, Justin, being able to clearly tell the models
Mhm.
and your team what you want is what is going to get you really good outcomes. And so that's why I talk about it that way.
I often saw myself, because I'm a lawyer and a coder, and so I often saw myself as being able to be that interpreter between the two, between IT and the lawyers, because IT, they have no idea what your specific industry does, right? And they speak the language of technology. They don't speak the business of legal or business. They want to know, like, is this on or off, or like how many items in the array are there? And if you talk that way to somebody who's not in IT, they speak a different language. So it's really helpful to have somebody who's able to translate the two,
I
kind of like a
totally,
chameleon.
yeah, I totally agree. I think the other thing you brought up there is IT, right? Both of us work with organizations, sometimes very large organizations that have very large IT teams, right? And IT is kind of this broad bucket, kind of like legal is this broad bucket. And then when you start digging in, you realize, well, there's actually a lot of sub pieces to what legal does and what IT does, right? And there's entire teams of IT that are just there to, you know, make sure the I's dotted and the T's crossed in X bucket. So Microsoft works in this way and that way versus helping you automate your work. It's two different ideas.
Exactly.
You still there, Justin? I'm getting a little bit of a lag.
Yeah, I think it's on my end.
Okay, sounds
My
good.
internet is going a little slow. So I
Okay.
just opened up the door to my office, trying to let the Wi-Fi in a little easier.
Sounds good. I'll just
See if
keep
that
talking
helps.
then. So, but on that IT
Okay.
idea, I think that's one thing that people get stuck with is software developers aren't necessarily, you know, quote unquote in IT, or teams that are going to help you build out that automation you want aren't necessarily in IT. But what you can do is you can clarify the kinds of things you need, the systems you want connected, and the end outcome so that IT and your broader corporate entity and whoever you bring in to help can help you put those things together. Right. And I think that's also really important. Also, I think, I hear this a lot right now, especially in the United States. There's a lot of this like, oh, well, are we going to waive confidentiality? Are we going to waive privilege? Are we going to use these AI models? And I think part of that is learning and understanding what these systems do, but then also working with your IT team to understand, okay, what do we actually have access to? Are we on Azure Shop, Microsoft? Are we on Google Cloud? Are
Mhm.
we on AWS? Where does our data sit? Is it in the US? Is it on a server in the EU? Like, where is it, so that I can start figuring out all those parts and pieces? And I think that, again, goes to the broader idea of understanding the architecture so that you can better make a clear output of what you want.
Yeah. And I think architecture also goes beyond the technology that people often think of, because like the people in your department are a part of the architecture. The fact that you have different legal teams, the fact that you have like a shared email box, the fact that you already have a template library. This is like just getting clear on what is the ecosystem of things that we have, that like what are the Lego pieces that we already have and that we can start putting them together, and you play with it. You don't just, I don't know, complain that like everybody's emailing me random stuff. Okay, that is an interface how people can interact with you. That's only one. Is there something else that you can set up with these Lego pieces, and you can become like an architect? I noticed that you talk about becoming a builder.
I do. There's two ideas I keep getting back to, which is builders tend to have sort of high agency. They go try and do stuff, right? And I think that mindset is really important, right? But I talk about it that way because if you believe like I do that learning is best accomplished through doing and trying, then you have to go build something. You have to just try, right? Like whatever it might be, a small automation, a full stack app, I don't care. Somewhere in between. Go try something, be a builder, have that mindset. Why I also talk about becoming legal architects is because you on your own have a full-time job and you are not going to also become a full-time developer, right? But if software and law are converging, if you've tried and you've built stuff, and if you learn the architecture of software, and as you said, of your team and where things sit, and the key critical thing, the context that you're trying to put together, right? Well, now you can architect these systems, as you talk about, that stop being one off problems that you have and start being systems that you can leverage for your entire team. And that's a big difference in how you think about how you practice and how you do work, right? So I like to talk about it as like a legal architect, which is, look, I know the law. I'm really good at my practice, my area, my thing, but I actually also know how to build systems, and I understand the leverage those systems can be. And I can also now talk the language of developers to a certain extent, so I can provide the teams that I work with information on what we need. Right? Again, as you said, right? If you're getting 1,000 emails a day and you're like, why am I doing this? One fix is Well, I can have it go to a specific email that I'll check at some point, right? Sure. Or you can start building systems, right? Leverage scale around that that can do a bunch of things. You can have automations within the email that automatically triage. You can have automations that send things to the specific person. You can layer in AI, which has like semantic search, and you can start having it search for keywords or ideas within those emails that automatically either get answered or go out to the right person. Again, all of this is about how you architect a different way of practicing. And yeah, I always also talk about this. It's scary, right? I get it. It's different. Change is hard. It's hard for everybody. End stop, period. It is hard for everybody. Even the ones that are better at it still are like, anxiety, right? But again, you can either stick your head in the sand like an ostrich, or you can go try. And I think that's the big thing I keep coming back to is when you have a little bit of agency and you go try, you learn all kinds of stuff and everything becomes easier.
I think there's also a difference between knowledge and imagination. Like
Mm.
many people, maybe when they're just beginning, they think that people like you and we already know everything, and
I know nothing.
like you said, I only know the things that I've done, right?
Mhm.
Because that's how I learned them, was I had to do it, so I learned how to do that. There might be many more things that are out there I have no idea because I've never had to use them or learn them. But in my mind, that doesn't really matter. It's imagination is more important than knowledge. Like if you can think up the solution, you can go find it. You can go on Google. You can go ask AI. You can ask a consultant or somebody. But it's the questions that matter more than the answer. 'Cause we have so much information now. Get better at asking questions
I couldn't
and
say
dreaming.
it better. It is exactly that. I mean, if you think about it, you go to law school and you get taught under the Socratic method, right? Which is basically like, the classic professor asking you a question and you're like, I don't have an answer, and you have to answer back and you answer questions back and forth, right? And that was something you got trained on. And now we have this, first instance of chatbots. And I know we're beyond that now with agentic AI and the rest of it, but the basic idea behind it is it's like an answering machine, right? And
Mhm.
you forget your skills are actually perfect for this new tool to work it through. Just ask a whole bunch of questions, right? One of the ways I got a lot better over the last 3 years at coding, I'm like a self-trained software developer, right? Like, and I'm not amazing by any means, but how did I learn some of this stuff? I tried doing some of the boot camps and it was helpful to some extent, but you know what really helped me was I would just code with a coding agent. And anytime I didn't understand something, I would just ask it. I would say, hey, what does that mean? Why did you do that? Right. And you
Infinite
learn all
patience.
kinds of stuff. Right. And I think that is true for no matter what you're doing, your frame of reference and how you go about it, it makes such a huge difference. And you just don't know what you don't know. That is classic. That everybody does this. And so if you have an open mind, you're willing to learn, you're willing to iterate, because that's the other big thing, right? A lot of people think AI is like a vending machine. You ask a thing and you get the perfect thing out. You get your candy bar out, right? When it's not, you have to like iterate over and over and over and over, sometimes hundreds of times to get the product you want. And so, again, most of that for me comes down to the idea that you have to go try, and through that learning through Socratic method, through asking questions, you'll just get better and better and better, and then kind of the light bulb will start to pop on, and you'll start to see, oh my god, this can make such a huge difference in my day to day, not just in my rote admin, but in just how I practice, the value I provide to the people that I service.
Mhm. So I'm hearing a couple of different things from you. Like there are different levels that a person can do this at. The first level is just being able to describe what it is that you do in like a step-by-step pattern kind of a way, even without knowing any code. You can now go have a conversation with AI or with an expert or with your IT department, and you can now communicate. This is highly valuable. I think that this is one of the biggest bottlenecks that there is. We now have so many different developers. We have so many AI tools that are available to us. What we don't have are the people like you, an embedded expert who knows exactly what needs to be done, and then have the skill to be able to communicate that. that is where I see is the bottleneck. That's what the skills that I would like to be able to promote on this podcast. Everybody get these skills, go get them. And then I'm hearing from you as well. A person can then go to the next level and actually start building themselves. You don't
Yeah.
have to rely on somebody else. You can become the expert. You can become the person.
Yeah. Both ideas are exactly dead on. So on the first one, right, here in the United States, there's a company called Palantir, and whether you like them or not, regardless, they kind of came up with this idea of a forward deployed engineer. And the idea was that they would send a software developer, an engineer, and they would sit down next to you while you were working at your computer, and they would watch you and your pain points and your workflow, and then they would build custom tooling for you. Why? Because it's the game of telephone, right? You put the tin can up and you pass it along, and by the time it gets to the sixth person, it's missing 12 things, right? And so they wanted somebody that would sit there who could actually code as you did the work and make you better, right? That was the whole idea. When AI first started coming out and it spat out all these answers, a lot of people thought, oh, well, maybe experts don't matter anymore. This knowledge machine, I can just ask it a question and it'll give me all the information. Well, what we've learned over the last 3 years is, sure, it raises the floor higher, but the ceiling is still much higher if you have domain expertise. Why is that? Well, domain expertise will let you take these tools to a whole other level. And that's why I talk about it like a 10x software engineer. Why are software engineers using this in a way that almost nobody else in the world is using it? Well, they're good at architecture. They're good at coding. This is fundamentally a machine. And the ones that are really good at software development were always really good at communication. That's why they were so good at doing what they did. And so you combine those two things and you just can get so much farther. And so your domain expertise as a legal professional is wildly important right now and is incredibly valuable. The thing is, there's only so many people that can sit next to you and code while you work. Turns out that if you can learn some of these architectures, some of these tools, you know who will do that? The machine sitting on your computer, right? Now, that can be a little scary because, are we teaching the machine to do my job? I get all that. I don't know if this is the place to have kind of that broader societal discussion about it. But fundamentally, just from a structure perspective, that is what these machines, these machines can do, right? And I think the next part of that is what you'll learn is that as you have it starting to do stuff for you, you can start building your own things. And if you can build your own things, you can communicate better with it. And if you can communicate better with it, guess what? You can build better things, right? It's a perfect flywheel of practice.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of a succinct, very brief answer to your philosophical question. Isn't this the whole point of technology? Ever since we took like two rocks together and like made a sharp tool, it was to do something that we can't do on our own. That's the whole point of the computer. It's gonna go forward whether you want it to or not.
Yeah, and I think the latter part of that, that you said, it's why I talk about it as this is how you maintain a seat at the table, right? I think we've had an influx of external talent come into the legal industry, which from my personal viewpoint is really good. And lawyers, legal professionals have a lot of domain expertise. But if all they do is try to sit back and wait and say, I don't need that, or you can't use it here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what happens is people just kind of say, okay, well, I'm just going to keep going and see you later. Right. And instead, you can participate in that evolution in a really significant way by learning this stuff. That way, when people come to you and say, I want to do X, Y, and Z, you better understand what that means and you can shape how that goes, right? I think that's the key thing.
I like this. Yeah, yeah. I often talk with young lawyers. Maybe they have just graduated from law school. They've been in their first job for a couple of months. They contact me and they say, I hate this. This is not what I wanted to do with my whole life. They're treating me like a robot. because the incentives are not aligned for efficiency, because the boss wants the billable hour to be up. So these recent graduates, they'll contact me and they say, I'm being treated like a computer and I'm getting paid a lot to do it, but I wish I could just get the computer to do this work instead. And then I ask them, well, do you know how to code? And they inevitably say, no, I don't. So the advice that I usually give them is, you first of all, you don't need to learn how to code. But I tell them, please stay in your area of expertise for at least 2, maybe 3 years, until you know it exactly. You know every piece of your domain. So much so that you could then connect with a developer who can code it. So you don't necessarily have to know it, but your domain expertise is valuable. Please go get it.
Totally agree, right? Look, I think there's something called T-shaped professionals. And a T-shaped professional is somebody who has a lot of expertise across a bunch of different things, and then really, really deep expertise on one idea. And why are those kinds of professionals, in my view, and a lot of other really valuable, especially right now? Well, if you have none of the generalist expertise across a bunch of different things, you don't have enough context to take that specific expertise and apply it to anything, right? And so that is why it's really important to have all kinds of disparate conversations and different people with different perspectives and diversities and all the rest of it, right? But that very specific niche domain expertise is hard earned. It's usually over time and lots of iteration, right? You know, if I think back to when I was doing large complex litigation, the first time I took a deposition, I was horrible at it, right? I mean, like, come on, let's be real here, right? But by the 400th time I take a deposition, right, I was really good at it. Why? Well, just time in the saddle, just doing it over and over and over. And so that really specific domain expertise is really helpful in anything you do. And so I agree with you. When people ask me, you know, should I go to law school? I generally say, look, it wasn't the best fit for me in the long run, but I learned a lot. And I think the question you have to ask yourself is, where do you want to be and why are you going to law school? I think the other thing I always talk about is, you know, you alluded to it a little bit, treating you like a robot. You know, a lot of people go into their jobs with no really fundamental understanding of how a business makes money, right? And I was 100% guilty of that when I started being a lawyer. And that is a mistake I think you can try to avoid, right? Because if you understand the fundamental architecture of how a business makes money and where you fit in that, you'll get a pretty good idea of what your day to day is going to look like in a lot of capacities, right? And in big law firms, in law firms generally, forever, the way law firms have made money is you, the young associate, are the product. That is how this works. You are going to work a lot, and that's how we're going to make money. Now, will that change with machines? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it'll get augmented. You know, again, automation versus AI conversation is probably not the place to have a broader business model conversation about the future of legal, but I think it is part of that conversation of, well, what do I do now? What if I'm a young lawyer, where do I go? And I think the key thing is, look, you might never get the 20-year experience that I have or another partner at a large law firm has, right? But that's okay. But if you can start getting some expertise in some portion of your work, you can then apply that in lots of different ways. So there's real value in learning those skills. Again, for me, too often people think that they've learned everything they're ever going to learn and they don't need to learn anything else. And I think that is
Mm.
the wrong way to go about life. You should be learning every single day like it's your job, because that is frankly how you succeed. And so for me, this is just like another moment. Yeah, it's a bunch of change. Yeah, it's a whole different thing I have to learn. So be it. Bring it on.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm hearing that that you have this special kind of mindset, that something pushed you, and I wonder if you want to describe what was that first time that you were like, no, I'm not going to do this anymore, even if society or the company expects me to do it this way. I'm done with this. I'm going to go find the tools and automate this or whatever.
Well,
Can you describe?
like is the case oftentimes, even I needed an external push, right? And that external push was my wife, who's much smarter than me. And, I still remember being like, "Oh, I just need to find a different law firm and a better platform. It'll be better for me." I was a partner in this firm, and she's like, "You hate your life. You like legit hate your life. Why would going to another law firm make any difference?" And I was like, "Oh," and it was like a light. Oh, that's interesting, right? And so I took a little bit of time to think about, well, what did I like about the law? What did I like about my job? Because there were moments and times I was really interested. And for me, if I look back at my career, it was always in that iterative factor of learning, right? I liked large commercial litigation because we'd get a new client and a new problem, and I would basically embed myself in a business and learn the business and learn all the things about it, and then come out of it in a way to try to defend or prosecute that case, right? That was interesting to me. I also would over and over use technology in every way I could to make my life easier, right? I mean, I'm old enough that I was in the days where I started my career and there were still concordance, which was before relativity, right? And, I would hack together concordance in ways that you weren't supposed to because it annoyed me, right, to no end. I was the guy who, like, our firm got like VoIP phones, and I figured out a way to hack it so I could play my own like a song as my ringer. People did not like that. That was not okay, right? All these iterative points, right, where I was like,
Was
oh,
it an inappropriate song, like some kind
it
of rap
was
or
Young
something?
Forever by Jay-Z. So I, I didn't put anything inappropriate on the ringer, but it was still like, what is that and what are you doing? My point being is that for me, I looked back on my career and I said, okay, what did I like? And I liked learning, I liked being iterative, I liked the puzzle factor. And so I took a baby step and I left the law firm world to work for Elevate Legal Services, which is an ALSP, still being a lawyer, but also finally getting into consulting, doing a little bit of technology. And because I am who I am, as I started meeting people, I was like, ooh, can I play with that thing? Can I play with that thing? Right. And luckily, there were a bunch of people in that company who were very kind and more than willing to let me learn how that goes about it. And so for me, it was kind of everything coming to a head and a moment in time where I said, you know what? It's time for me to try something different because the path forward wasn't just making me happy. It was just making me actually very unhappy. And that's not a good place to go through the world. And so that's what really sent me down that path. But for me, the thing that I always talk about in my journey is that it's not like I'm some wildly crazy unicorn person, right? I think at the end of the day, the thing I keep telling
Your
people is
wife might
anybody can
disagree.
do this. What'd you say?
Your wife might disagree.
Well, maybe, but that's a
And
good
she might
thing,
say
right?
you are a
But
wild unicorn.
yeah, anybody can do this. You can learn, you can grow, you can improve, and you can change your career in whatever capacity you want. I think that has been shown over and over and over. And so you just have to go ahead and try. And so there's lots of stuff out there now. And part of what I'm trying to do with Possible Law is with my Substack and podcast and tools is give people kind of a little bit of a window into kind of where things are going in my view of the world,
Hmm.
but also give them opportunities to learn and say, hey, I don't have to quit my job and start a legal tech company right now. I just want to learn how to use these tools. Okay, cool. Well, here's some architecture stuff. Here's some builder stuff. Here's what the bleeding edge looks like. This is what confidentiality might be, whatever it might be, to help them start changing kind of that frame of reference. Because I think that's the big thing. You, Justin, didn't go from lawyer to, moving to Europe to automations to all the different things just because you were born genetically predisposed to do that. Maybe a little bit, but I think mostly you had a frame of reference, a mindset as you started this show with, that you were willing to just try different things and grow and learn, and you got better at stuff and you find other things that you were interested in, and that's no different now. I think the people that just wait and think that nothing's going to change, and that when we're 5 years from now and they're like, oh my god, I can't believe the world is like this, those are the ones that are going to be in trouble, right? again, shape what's coming, participate in what's coming, and on the other side of it, maybe it won't be perfect, but at least you'll have participated in trying to shape it in a view of the world that you want.
I'm hearing innovation and curiosity are the two things that you need to be able to take advantage of these tools that are here and that are coming. I'm hearing from you that it is not a genetic predisposition. Many people can do this. I did an episode on the lack of curiosity and why we have this lack of curiosity in our society. For example, I'm seeing my own children, how they are using these chat bots. They're just using it to cheat on their homework. And I'm telling them, no, you cannot. You have to use it, to explore and to learn. And they're like, Dad, I don't care. So I do have this question, like, where does this come from that is within you and is within me?
Yeah, that's a
I
good
would like to
question,
think I
Justin.
wasn't born with it.
I love where this is going. I love talking this stuff because I think it's both really critical for kind of the future, but also wildly interesting. Like, why are some people incredibly curious, right?
Einstein and Tesla.
Yeah, right. Like, why?
Can
What
everybody
causes?
become them? Or were they special?
What causes you to do that? I don't know. I know that in teaching my daughter, I always try to talk to her about not the end result, but the path, the journey to get to the end result, and that
Process.
the journey is always more interesting than the end result, frankly, almost always. And so if you get really good at loving the journey, that ends up meaning you tend to be pretty curious, right? And for me, that
This is my
curiosity,
personality.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that curiosity is like a wild superpower right now with AI because it's interesting. Even people who are really, really sophisticated professionals who have lots of experience on the software developer side, you watch them sometimes and they use it again like a vending machine, or they just, hey, I need you to fix this code. It's got this bug. Fix the thing, right?
Um,
Outcome. And then you see others and they're just like, what's the wildest thing I can ask this thing to do? Let's see what happens, right? And that version of it is where you start seeing like, oh my God, I didn't even know it could do that. If it can do that, it might be able to do this, right? It's so interesting. I was talking to somebody yesterday. I think I'm pretty close to the leading edge of like kind of what's going on. I read endlessly. I'm watching stuff. I try to keep up with it. But again, it's like fire hose of information. So like so much. But I try to be pretty good. So when people say to me, "Have you seen this thing or have you seen that thing?" I'm 95% of the time I'm like, "Yeah, I saw that repo on GitHub," or "Oh, I haven't tried it yet, but it's on my list." And yesterday I was talking to a friend. He's like, "Have you seen this thing called Clicky?" And I'm like, "What's Clicky? What is it?" It's basically a repo. A guy came up with this idea and he said, "Look, you can feed screenshots into AI now and ask it questions. Well, what if it screenshots everything you're doing over and over and over really, really fast and follows your cursor? And then it can teach you how to use something." And the example on the repo is how to use DaVinci Resolve, which is like a video editing software. And
mhm.
basically, he's like, you move the cursor and you point it and you're like, hey, I have this video. I want to make it cinematic. How do I do that? And then the cursor starts moving and it highlights where to go and it moves click this thing, right? Why? Again, somebody imagination was like, "Oh my god, it could do this thing. Let's see if it can do that thing." And you meld them together. And I think that's a great example of just what's available right now. And in the legal space, right? AI automation, that is a big deficiency in my view is I don't think the legal teams are even thinking big enough as to like what they actually could accomplish because they're so used to kind of
Mhm.
their old systems or not just their old systems but their old way of doing things, right? And so again, that's why it's great to have people like you who can come in and you sit down because this happens to me, right? They'll bring me on and they'll say, "We want to do X." I'm like, "Okay, but like, what are you trying to actually achieve?" And they tell me why, and I'm like,
Why?
Let's do Y." And they're like, "What do you mean we can't do Y?" I'm like, "Sure we can, right? Like, of course we can do that, right?" And it's because there's just none of that kind of like imagine piece to it, and I
Mhm.
think that's a big thing that's missing. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
I think this is a big thing that you and I offer to our clients is imagination. It's not knowledge. And like I've done so many projects with so many clients, and I'll have like oftentimes it's the same kind of thing. Like I've seen this before, like this is easy. But the fun stuff is when a client brings something new to me and then they ask, can you do this? And I'm like, I'm not really sure, but yeah, I'm pretty sure I'll be able to figure this out.
Yeah, let's try it. I think it's also really cool right now
Let's
is
try it.
one of the ways that I teach people to leverage AI in a much more efficient manner is give it really good examples. And I don't mean from like this idea of training the models, like we're past that kind of right now. I mean
Mhm.
it in the way that you guide a model, right? You instruct it to go a certain way. If you give it an
Like an
example,
intern.
right? If you give it an example of your writing that you love, you know what it's going to do? It's going to pattern match against that and it's going to give you writing that looks a lot like your writing, right? It's the same with an automation, right? Or anything. If you've built an automation that you're like, this mostly works, but I would really like it to do this thing. And I can't quite figure it out. But you drop in the automation you do and give it context. You know what comes back? Pattern matching and an idea. Hey, maybe this. One of the really cool things right now is that because there's so many parameters of data in these models, you can sort of open end it, ask it to do something, and it will just figure stuff out. I saw this guy I follow on LinkedIn. I can't remember his last name, Adam. It doesn't matter, but he's like an automation guy, a lawyer, etc. And he was talking about this like 1998 video game that he loved that no longer works on these like 64 ARM computers, and he just dropped it into Claude. He's like, I've spent years trying to get this to work. It's like my stupid hobby that I really like. I wish I could play it. I couldn't get it to work on any new computers. I dropped it into Claude and it just like figured it out. And all of a sudden, I have this working thing. I have no idea what it did. I have no clue, right? It's that imagination that I think can really give legal teams an opportunity to really change the way they practice. And again, I keep coming back to this. I talk about this a lot. What is the point of a legal department, right? I know you as the
Mhm.
lawyer are managing risk and you're doing your job and you're reviewing the contracts and the rest of it. And yes, that's part of your job. But the legal department there is to help the business do whatever the heck the business does. Make widgets, right? Like whatever the business does, that's your role. Protect risk, help the business do that. So if you have it from that perspective, well, how can you provide value to the business? You and I talked about this before is that, a lot of times the business gets scared, right? Because they're like, well, I don't want to screw this up, or I don't really know what to do if this comma changes or the clause or somebody asks for this. And so everything ends up coming to legal, right? Can you look
Mhm.
at this? And legal ends up like, this is a business term. Like, why am I involved in this? And it is that fear. And so, how do you get over that? How do you serve the business? How do you provide more value? Well, you better understand where they're coming from and you give them tools to do that. I know you've built hundreds of products for teams that do that exact thing by taking off a lot of that anxiety and giving the business the tools that they crave. Now, yes,
I,
does that mean the legal department is working differently? Yes, it does. But whether you call it working at the top of your license or you call it just using your brain in a manner that isn't rote admin, at the end of the day, if you're willing to adapt, you can provide way more value. And guess what? In my experience, if you provide more value, you know what comes back? More money, more accolades, more career growth, more all those things, right? Do those things and you will succeed.
I'm hearing the words empower and enable.
Empower and enable agency. Look, somebody like you just goes and does stuff, right? You're a high agency person. Not everybody's like that. It doesn't mean you have to
Mhm.
be like that. But if you empower and enable your team, the business, you're going to do really well. And that can start with just empowering yourself, right? It can be a small little, Google app script that you drop into a Google Sheets that does something automatically for you. It can be, a little micro SaaS that you've built to triage your emails for you in the morning, whatever it might be, right? And then as you start doing that, you'll start seeing kind of the imagination part come out of you. And you can go, hey, Justin, I built this little thing, but my team keeps asking me for it. It's not going to work at scale. Can you make this work for everybody? And Justin was like, sure. Now I know what you've built. Now I understand the pain points, the systems, the rest of it. This is a job I can do for you.
I did one for the boss's boss. He wanted to know, he was a leader over like all of Europe. So he had lawyers in all these different countries. And he always wanted to know who is going to be out of the office today because they're on vacation or they have a doctor's appointment. He just wanted to know where everybody is not going to, just in case somebody emailed him, like, a director or a vice president, and he would be aware. They would ask, like, where's John today? John in Ireland. And he would know, So he asked us, all of us, please send me an email every day that you're out of the office at 6 a.m. that day. Well, nobody wanted to do this. There were like 50 people under him, right? So this little automation that I created was, I created a group calendar, and it was on SharePoint. So everybody that was in the group had access to this calendar, and then they could import the calendar into Outlook. So it was a secondary calendar beyond their personal one. It was a group holiday and vacation kind of a calendar. And so we told everybody, just put your events there. Even if you know months in advance, just put them there. And so you don't have to email. So then I had an automation that ran every workday at 6 a.m. and it would look to see, are there any events on this calendar this day? If there were, it made a list of them and sent a single email to the boss's boss. We got rid of all of these emails.
And I think that's actually a really good example of something that could become sort of like a scalable company, right? I mean, like that basic idea is Calendly, right? It's like automation of your events, right? But it's also a perfect example of, you know what, maybe I don't need to go buy that software. Maybe I can build this internally with a pretty simple script from somebody who has imagination, has the skill set, can do those kinds of things. And I think that buy versus build mindset is another thing that's going on right now, which is like, people ask me, you want me to become a builder? Does that mean I should just build all my tools? And I always say, like, no. Builders, software developers buy all kinds of tools, right? Like, I mean, I have teams of software developers that I talk to on Slack or whatever, right? Like, they're not rebuilding Slack just because they can. They're making good decisions, but they're making decisions in different ways so that they can understand what they own, what they can provide value on, what makes sense for them from a monetizable standpoint versus something that they can go buy and do on their own, right? And I think that is a key thing here is if you've never built anything, it's kind of hard to understand when a vendor comes to you and says, oh, this is, so complicated and it's going to cost $8 million. And so you really should just buy it from me. What are you going to do? You don't know what you don't know. And so you're going to say like, okay, I guess that's true. But if you've built some of this stuff, maybe you won't know everything, but you can say, you know what, that's actually kind of not true. I know because some of what you're telling me, I did in a weekend. And so maybe I need to like dig into this a little bit more. Right. And I think if you're a legal department and you're constantly being told by your CFO, look, your budget's too high, or we don't have enough money for that, or I know you want more technology, but like it's a complicated thing. Well, maybe if you can better understand what you can build on your own versus what you can go procure, now you're in a better place when you're doing that procurement cycle to make decisions on what is actually valuable. Because the other thing about it is there's lots of software out there that is legacy software that has a name behind it, frankly, not very good. But you go spend a lot of money on it because what else would you do? And instead, now you understand how these systems work a little bit better. And you can go to the maybe up and coming one, maybe not a full startup, but maybe middle market or something and say, you know what, that's half the price. And it actually works a lot better for what we need. All of a sudden, you saved yourself some money, you've done some good work, and you can move forward. So I always talk about it from the perspective of, it doesn't have to be that you're going to build everything. It could just be you're making better procurement decisions. It means you're using the tools you already have at your disposal in a way that you just didn't before.
I did an episode on build versus buy, and people are hung up on this issue. They're always, somebody has an opinion that one is better than the other. And the conclusion I came to is you're always doing both. You're never just doing one. Like, even if you go buy something, Look, okay, you've bought a dozen different kinds of tools that are all in different corners of different things. Guess what you're doing with those 12 things? You're building an ecosystem. So as you're buying, you're also building, okay? You need to be building at the same time. And also, when you say, I'm going to go build something, you don't build it from scratch. You're taking a database system that already exists. You're taking some kind of a programming language, some other stuff, APIs and whatever. So even as you're building, you're buying. I don't necessarily mean with money. Like even if you use open source tools, you're buying into the fact that these open source tools have a community behind them that will continue to support this for years. Because what happens if it becomes orphaned? Oh, there's a huge cost there, you know? So you're buying and building no matter what you do.
Yeah, and again, look, I always talk about incentives rule the world, and you have your own selfish incentives, the company has its incentives, and guess what? Every vendor has an incentive, right? And so they're incentivized to tell you that building is wildly more expensive than maybe it is. And that's why I always try to talk about this from the perspective of knowledge and information, right? And just being able to make better decisions. I also want to say, this is a good moment in time to say there's lots of really good reasons why companies
Yeah.
are building stuff that you can't or you really shouldn't, right? There's always going to be something that is state of the art or bleeding edge or just really, really complicated. And yeah, that's not a good place for you to go start. A perfect example is like Microsoft Word, right? If you're a software developer, you're like, what do you mean you don't have like clear versioning? Why are you saving like every Microsoft Word document with a different version name? Doesn't have versioning. Why don't you just use Git, right? And whether that's the right idea or the wrong idea, it's pretty complicated, right? A lot of people don't understand that the docx file is a messed up like system architecture. It's just
It
hard
is.
to actually deal with, right? And so there's only so much innovation you can. So for that, it's actually good that all these venture backed companies are innovating on it and try to build really cool new things. It's probably not the place for you to innovate on. Now, you can still build your own redlining tool, not that complicated. You can do it in docx. You can build your own repository and add some sort of semantic search to it, right? You can do some of the basics, but maybe not bleeding edge, right? And I think the key thing again is you're always building in some capacity. And more than likely, you're always buying in some capacity. And so, because you're not like a
Mhm.
software development shop, that's not what you do. But being able to do both gives you choice. And that choice also gives you the leverage to make just much better decisions. And oh, by the way, back to the cost factor, if you understand how these systems work, you have a lot more leverage when you're dealing with that contract, right? When they're telling you this is the price and you're like, well, is it really the price? What are you actually selling me, right? And that whole lock-in architecture. That's another thing that's being talked about right now, right? As some of these companies, the Harveys and Lagoras of the world get so big, well, where are they going to make that money back? And how are they going to lock you in? That's the classic thing every software company's ever done. I don't mean to call them out as doing anything wrong. That's what you're
Uber,
supposed to
everybody.
do, right? And how do you protect yourself, whether you're a legal department or a law firm or just like a business, from that kind of situation? Sometimes there's no choice, right? At the end of the day, there's only so many database companies. There are only so many platform companies. There are only, right? Sometimes you just have to make that choice, and that's fine. But if you have more ability to understand the architecture of your systems and tooling, you can make better choices that allow you to avoid some of that lock-in or at least negotiate better contracts.
I'm also hearing that this connects back to our earlier conversation about like putting together Lego bricks in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know we've
Look at
we've
what
had
you have.
a long, varied conversation without actually really touching on the whole idea of automation versus AI, which I love, by the way. And
Oh,
I
okay.
I think I think one of the things I keep coming back to is something you and I have talked about, which is when do you use any given
Mhm.
tool, right? And it's the, you know, square peg round hole, right? Or it's this idea that AI is everything. And I think part of that is because there's just so much money behind it right now that there's just like everybody talking about it. But AI is not really a new thing. Even a lot of the stuff that seems new is pretty old, has been in like Google Gmail for like 15 years almost, right? It's not novel. But what is novel is some of the ways it's being leveraged. And so it's a question point of like what you do. I saw a friend post a couple days ago about doc automation tools, right? Does AI just eliminate doc automation tools? And his point was, look, if you're not creating anything new, you're just literally moving templates and clauses. Guess what works really well for that? Automation tools. And guess what's way cheaper than AI? Automation tools. But if what you're trying to do is layer in, semantic search or some level of reasoning or judgment, or a big one that for me was like a kind of an eye opener when I first started really leaning into learning kind of the AI stack 3 years ago was, OCR, when you take a document and you turn it into data and text, has always been kind of a complicated thing. And forever, if you had a PDF, think about legal, right? You get a lease in, you get a document, and it's in PDF. Somebody sends it to PDF, and you're like, I can't believe it. And it's like handwritten notes. Or, right, in a lease agreement, it might be a handwritten number, right, in a margin. That just killed automation. It killed AI. It killed everything. It was just really difficult to do anything with, right? Now, with these large language models, that is like an unbelievable unlock, which means that in your automation, where it used to fail, A plus B, and you needed C to get to D, it would fail at C because it couldn't OCR the PDF. Now it can do that. So the point is, for me, is always comes back to is like, where can each tool sit in your stack to get you the outcome you want? Sometimes you don't need AI at all. Sometimes automation is not going to work by itself. You need both to have a cohesive ecosystem.
So the title of today's episode, AI, automation versus AI, it's kind of a misnamed kind of a thing. It's not a versus. It's not an either or. It's an and.
It's an and.
You use
Look,
them both.
everything is always nuanced. And I think too often we get lost in trying to make one better than the other. Again, for all, whether it's incentives or whether you just think the technology works better one way or the other. But I think, to your point, all the tools have a space. And if you learn how to leverage them at the right points, you're going to get way farther along than trying to use just one for everything.
I had the general counsel of a CLM, Malbec. He was on 2 weeks ago, and he gave the example that like most people walk into a hardware store, they don't know which tool that they need. All these different kinds of tools. He said he's exactly like this kind of person. He's like, I just want to walk in and get a hammer. I don't know exactly which hammer I need. I just want to get one. And he said there's other kinds of people, they know, and he said his own spouse is like this, that they know all the different kinds of tools, and like they'll have like 10 different kinds of hammers at home. And he's like, why do you have so many tools?
Yeah. Colin is really smart, right? He's really good at talking about things in a way that people can understand. And I agree with him. I think we had an age of software being built in ways that were beneficial to the software builder, right? And then handed to you in legal and told, this is how it works. And yes, you could ask for features or different workflows, but it was difficult, right? And now we're in an age where if you have some agency and some willingness, you can customize things in ways you just couldn't before, right? And so before, you were like, I'm a lawyer. I don't want to build stuff. I don't need to build stuff. I don't care. Just give me the hammer. That's all I want, right? But now what's interesting is you can have a little bit of agency, like his spouse, and say, you know what? Maybe I don't need 10 hammers, but I can do a little work and I can understand the difference between like a rubber mallet and a big, sledgehammer and a small little hammer. And I can understand the tool and the use case and why it works and where it works, right? Now, I should make clear as a disclaimer, I have like 9 hammers in my house. So I'm definitely one of those people. But I think the idea holds is I think if you still continue on the path of saying, I don't need to worry about that, I'm just going to buy something and it'll get done, I think you're missing out on a lot of opportunity to provide the value you are trying to provide for your team, for
Mhm.
yourself, for whatever it might be. Again, when I talk about becoming a builder, if you want to become a builder and actually do all that stuff, go for it. You can do it now. But if you just want to better understand the systems you're using and leverage them in ways you just couldn't before, become a micro builder, so to speak. Become somebody who can build something because you'll just learn and you'll get better at stuff.
I keep hearing you use the word agency, and I'm also thinking of the word participation. It used to be that we couldn't participate in this. We were just given the tools and systems that were provided to us. And now we're becoming more powerful that we're able to participate in this. We're not just slaves to the systems that are provided to us.
I love the way you said that. Participation is a great way to talk about it, right? Because even if you wanted to, right? As much as I wanted to participate in the software development ecosystem, up
Mhm.
until, maybe 18 months ago, realistically, I wasn't going to do it unless like I really spent every day learning how to code, and that wasn't going to happen. Now I can. I as technical as a full scale AI engineer? No. But do I understand the systems? Do I understand what we can build? Do I understand the state of the art? Do I understand how to leverage them in a way that's beneficial to my customers and myself? Yes, which means now I can take an idea and I can put it into the world. And I actually don't need 12 other people to do that. And I think that's another key thing. Lots of people in legal departments have good ideas and they have pain points that they want to solve. And they just were stuck before. No money, no resources, no time. Now you can participate in that ecosystem in a way you just couldn't before. And I think that's a really great way to talk about it.
I had a vendor on a couple of months ago, and they talked about how their dream customer is someone who would participate with them in this journey of providing, improvement to the customer. They said we can't just have customers who come and don't know the problem and they just want to throw money when they can't explain their problem, right? So yeah, they talked about this participation. They called it a partnership, probably not in the legal sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting viewpoint. I think the more you can aid in achieving whatever goal you're trying to achieve, the better off you're going to be, right? At the end of the day, though, when you're hiring a vendor, right, and you're paying them for something, the question is, what are you paying them for? What's the value that they are providing, right? And I'm always very cognizant of that from my side of it is, as a consultant and I do work, what's the value I'm giving? And if the value that they want is to not have to think about it, then I have to figure out, can I
Mm.
actually deliver that, right? If I think that they need to participate in this, that they need to have ownership and agency in it, then I usually say that, right? Sometimes people are like, well, I don't want to use you, and that's okay. And I think his point, the vendor's point is, we only know so much, right? And we can only build based on the information we have. If you want something that we don't have, you need to help us understand why it's important and how it can provide value to you and beyond. And again, a vendor has a very specific business goal, right? And how they're trying to grow and the amount of time they have and the number of features they're going to create. And so, bringing this all the way back around, whether you hire that vendor and you partner with them to help them grow their product so it works better for you and for others, or you don't, at the end of the day, you can use that tool with automation, with your own AI stack, with other tools, and become a systems connector of sorts and get a lot of leverage out of that maybe you couldn't before. And that's that participation. Now you can really participate in building in a way you just couldn't before.
All right. So let's bring this back to the discussion of automation versus AI. So there is a line somewhere. Both of them are needed. How would you describe where is that line and how can people find it? How does a person know that this is a simple tool that I want repeated over and over again, and or this is where I need the big stuff? Is it the big stuff? Is one
Um,
higher than the other? I don't know.
yeah,
Your thoughts?
you stumble around in the dark for a while. I don't know if there's a perfect answer for it. I think, I posted today about this idea of understanding the plumbing underneath your legal tech so you can make better decisions on where each of it fits. I think AI is really good at things like extraction, right? Where before you maybe needed to pull stuff out on your own out of an email or out of a PDF, as we talked about earlier, or out of some database so that it could layer into an automation so that the automation could work versus, if you just, again, as we talked about, if you just need the same clause dropped into a new document with the entity names changed and you already know the entity names and there's no differences, what's really good at that? Doc automation, right? I think the line ends up coming down to what are you trying to achieve and where can you use the different tools to get there, right? Part of that is really understanding what the different tools do, right? I think that learning mechanism is what's important. So, I know for LinkedIn and the rest, people just wanna, this is what you should do. Unfortunately, I'm not very good at that. I tend to have a more nuanced viewpoint on things. But, you know, I think for me at least, I always view it as where is it probabilistic versus deterministic? If it's deterministic, good example is math, right? You should use code. Code is deterministic. You write the code, it does what it tells you, and that's what it does. That means if you want a math problem solved or jurisdiction date hit, you should use code to write the algorithm to do the math, right? If you want probabilistic, meaning create from nothing a new thing, right? Based on millions and billions and trillions of parameters on the next most probabilistic token, LLMs are great at that. Now, why would that work for things like PDFs? Well, it's the underlying neural networks of how these things work. What it's doing is it's basically taking all kinds of information and to some extent guessing as to what's in there based on probability of what it's seen before, right? It's seen a smudged 7 8 billion times and it's pretty confident that that 7 is a smudged 7 in handwriting, right? Or whatever it might be. And so the key thing here is there is a line. I think there is a line. And learning where that line is part education and part doing, right? You get a better feel for it. I think if you build the automation and you include both, you'll start seeing where it breaks and then you can adjust. And I think that's part of it. And by the way, that first level of this, you don't actually have to build the largest, most complex system on earth to start learning those things to see what works and what doesn't.
Mhm. I think it really depends on your situation, the tools that you have available to you, maybe your budget constraints. you might you might be able to like buy the biggest greatest thing, and okay, or you might be more constrained in a budget way. Um, it might also depend on like, can you change your process? Like you keep using the example of a PDF. People send a smudged PDF. Well, in my mind, I'm thinking, why are they sending smudged PDFs? Why don't you just demand a docx? And then the person would say, well, we don't have the docx. When we go get the contract signed, it's converted to a PDF. Well, you had a docx right there. Why aren't we, coupling those two together and having them go together into your repository, right? So
Uh, you know,
there's a phrase, automate the simple and then simplify the complex, and you just keep doing that over and over again.
I think that's a really good way to talk about it, and it's a good thing to remember. Humans are always going to human, right? Which means like they're going to do stuff that makes no sense, and you don't know why. And it's like the classic: "Why did you send me red lines in a PDF? You're just mean. That's just mean. Like, why did you do that?" Right? And humans are going to human, and sometimes you can automate that away, and sometimes you can't. And that's kind of the fuzzy fun of doing this
You
kind
might
of
be
work.
powerless.
It is what it is, right?
Yeah. Um, well, this is great. You are one of the few people that I have found who has gone from lawyer to technology kind of a person. Usually the way that I see it is that somebody was a software developer and then they became a lawyer. So kudos to you.
You know,
You're a rare person.
everything in life is about what kind of gives you the drive to spend time on something, right? And I've always loved building stuff. You know, the fact that I didn't become a software developer is, who knows, right? Happenstance of life, and maybe not being as good as math as I actually maybe are or didn't think I was, right? Again, confidence and knowledge and all kinds of stuff. But I always talk about it. You can only do what's in front of you. Take one step at a time, try to improve who you are, and see what comes out the other side, right? I have lots of work to do. I have lots to learn. And for me, I just want to keep trying to get better at my craft and along the way serve others in a positive fashion.
That's beautiful. Feels like we could just end right there. uh, anything else that you would like to leave? I think it feels like it's a good place that we can wrap up. How can people contact you, and your final thoughts that you would like to leave with people? It's very inspiring.
I
People can
appreciate
start.
that. I think the final thought is just pretty simple. Go try. There's really no downside, and we are at a moment in time where the cost of doing so is maybe as low as it's ever gonna be, and that should give you opportunities as you grow in your career, right? Everybody can do it if you just go try. Um, and then the other piece of that is there are real experts in the world. There are real people out there who can really help you when you get to that point where you need some help. Don't diminish people just because there's a chatbot that can answer 100 million different things, right? There are real people like you, Justin, who can help you get over the line when you get stuck. And so leverage those two things, and you're going to be way better off than trying to think you can just use the machine or just do everything yourself. So I just want to I want to put that out there because I think it's really important. I can be found on LinkedIn. I have a Substack called Possiblaw, a podcast called Possiblaw. I'm around various places. You can see me in Reddit all over the place. I tend to like Reddit. I think it's a fascinating little universe of commentary. Some of it bad, but most of it pretty good. And just reach out. I always love to talk, and I think one of the things I've learned is, if you build community, if you put yourself out there, and you provide value for no other reason than you're just trying to help people, good things come. So reach out and say hi.
Nice. And how do you spell possible?
So it's POSSIBLAW. So like possible law, but smashed together. Possibla.
I was thinking to myself before we came together today. I was thinking, what were some other possible mashups of words? And I thought law ability, but then I thought that's kind of really close to liability. The law abilities of that are just
Kind
too
of
high.
like that. It's kind of fun. Yeah, on the business side of stuff, I always like, I think one of the fun things about starting companies is the initial like first ideas of like what are you going to do and your mission and the naming and all that kind of stuff. And so I like to try to come up with something that's not just like, Sal Carranza LLP.
All right, and your last name for people who are just listening and
Oh
are
yeah,
wondering how do you spell Carranza?
Carranza. So Carranza.
Okay, and your first name is Sal, but on LinkedIn your full name is Salvador.
Yeah, Salvador Carranza. You can find me. You'll see my silly face with all my Possible branding all over the place. So
All right. Well, it's been great meeting with you. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope to interact with you uh, continuously. It's been great getting to know you, and yeah, I this is a big part of creating this podcast was for me just to meet people, and like you said, putting good stuff out into the world and connecting with people. It's always beautiful.
I can't wait to do fun stuff with you, Justin. And until next time.
All right. Until then, until next time, everyone. I wish you happy automating.